So, Charlie, I'm going to start with a shameless plug for my new book. Okay. It doesn't come out till April 2nd, but I have signed this to you, and I will not check on you to see if you've read it, but it's there for your reading pleasure. So, how many of you have watched Charlie on video or listened to his podcast or whatever? So most of you. That's great. We were talking a little bit about what might be kind of an interesting way to start, and I just kind of dropped the name John Money. How many of you have ever heard of John Money? Anybody raised? Yeah, that boo is right, but John Money really, I'm just going to get this started, and then I'm going to let Charlie go, and then we'll dialogue as we go. But John Money in 1955 created the term gender. A lot of you think it's been around since Adam and Eve. Okay? What do you think about John Money? What did he bring to the table, Charlie, that you think was really significant that we have to deal with today?
Yeah, great to be here, everybody. So many friends that I see, Teresa, and so many great people. Look, John Money was doing the devil's bidding while he was here on Earth. He's from New Zealand, so I won't blame Simon too much.
Sorry about that, Simon.
When we were talking about New Zealand earlier, I was thinking, who's the most evil person? And then that's John Money. He's from New Zealand. So let's just be clear about this. The transgender craze that's all across the West right now and in America is one of the most demonic, evil things happening, affecting all ages, particularly children. It is a defining line of morality, and we have to be on the right side of this, the biblical side, God's side of this, the separation between adult and child, the separation between good and evil, and it is one of the hottest topics right now. So there are three categories. There is sex, gender, and personalities, okay? There are two sexes, there are no genders, and infinite personalities.
That's where you clap. In case you don't know if he was setting you up or not, that's a win, okay? Go.
It might not be that kind of church. I guess they're just kind of like...
You know, they're learning. They're all transitioning.
I could do the Jeb Bush thing. Please clap, everybody, you know? I could do that. It's fine. I'm giving you a hard time. So let's go through that. Sex. God created male and female. And so I spent 2 hours today at Cal State Fullerton. And I see some people that were there, and that was... And this one young lady, and I don't want to, I'm assuming her sex. I think she was a young lady. She says she's a feminist, and I ask her, well, what is a woman? And she says, that's a trick question. You can't say this. Just so you know, the vast majority of young people on campus, they can't give you just like a blunt answer of what is a woman, right? That is just a example of the poison and the toxin that has infected our education system. So God created male and female. I asked her, I said, okay, outside of male and female, what other categories are there in the human species? Like, I'm open for any sort of suggestions. And they can't ever give you an answer. So what John Money did, and he was inspired by Alfred Kinsey, who is an evil pedophile, awful person who has a statue, by the way, at Indiana University, Bloomington. Alfred Kinsey, by the way, his curriculum is not ostensibly, but is embedded all throughout California public schools, embedded in universities. If you send a kid to college, they're going to learn Kinsey and Money type of beliefs. So John Money, he had one thing he was best known for, besides also basically butchering twins, and I'll get to that in a second. It was one of the most disgusting stories ever. He believed that sex, AKA he called it gender, was malleable up until 2 years. And so you'll hear anybody that thinks they know what they're talking about on a college campus, they'll be like, oh, well, blue is an assigned color for a boy and pink is an assigned color for a girl. And, a boy can be a girl and a girl can be a boy in those first 2 years. And these are all norms that are basically ascribed to them. And of course, anyone who's a parent knows this is total rubbish, of course, obviously. You have to go to university, you have to get a PhD to believe something so stupid as this. And by the way, it's probably mostly theorized by the childless. The childless are the ones that are destroying the country. You could be good without children, but if you're bad, you probably don't have children. That is my rule for the decline of the West. So John Money, he writes in several academic papers, and it infected all of the academies, that we have to create this new category called gender, and we took it, by the way. We being the West, we're like, oh yeah, okay, and we always kind of assumed that sex and gender were the same thing. They're completely different. So they wouldn't say that sex doesn't exist. They would just say sex is, discovered at birth, and that's fine. Those are just your genitalia, but who you really are is your gender. And you discover who you are as you get older. And the way it should be broken down is, wait a second, are you talking about personalities? That's a totally different thing. And what they've done is now it's in our curriculum. They have these gender-affirming care clinics, and we should reject the premise is that regardless of how much surgery, pills you take, chopping off your parts, you can never become the other thing. Is that it's how God made you, period. And unfortunately, they're creating a mass crisis here in the West. America is the worst at this right now in the industrialized world. I never thought I would look to Britain for inspiration. This week, the United Kingdom has announced that a total ban on puberty blockers for children. Total ban. And that is following the Netherlands, that is following Sweden, that is following many other European countries. Again, I'm not a fan of socialized healthcare, and you shouldn't be either. But the only good thing about socialized healthcare is if the government makes a good decision, it's done. We have these for-profit gender-affirming care clinics all across the country. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I know there's at least dozens here in California. There's probably even more. And we know there's hundreds across the country. These places are predatory. These doctors should all go to jail for the abuse of children. They are not administering medicine. They are not clinicians. These are groomer predators that manipulate well-intentioned parents, and I can go into this because it's fascinating the more I dive into it, of actually the type of parent where a kid is most likely to be trans, and it's not what you think it is. And they say the same thing over and over again. They'll say, do you want a dead son or an alive daughter? Or do you want a dead daughter or an alive son? And it is complete, total manipulation and blackmail. And any parent who hears that is like, oh my goodness, give them the drugs. Give them Lupron, right? Give them testosterone replacement therapy, chop off their breast, give them a hysterectomy, whatever it takes. And we now know there has been tens of thousands of youth that have engaged in pharmacological chemical castration. It's probably north of hundreds of thousands. And that's what's so creepy about this. We don't know the numbers. We don't know the numbers. We have to guess. We're relying on like leaks from the insurance industry, and we're inferring that they will never tell us how many kids are actually doing this. So we know for certain thousands of kids are getting the irreversible breast removal, hysterectomy. There's other more graphic terms I'm not going to use just because it's not worth it. But we know that is for certain. And then we can't forget also the 18, 19, and 20-year-old that are technically not minors, but their brains are not fully developed, and they go to a college campus, and they hear about the idea of sex and gender, and there's doctors on the campus that say, well, your parents never really loved you, here's Lupron. Or here is testosterone replacement therapy. And I'll throw it back to Phil with this. I kid you not, over winter Christmas break, I had 3 parents come up to me independently. I was at the grocery store, whatever, and they all said, Charlie, my 19-year-old just went to University of Chicago, and they came back, and all of a sudden they told me that they're actually a boy and raised as a girl, and all these drugs, they say, I don't understand it. What do I do? And that's a very difficult question to answer, and we could dive into that. But this is a social contagion. It's a toxin. I believe it's straight from the pit of hell. And I'll be honest, I'm underwhelmed and disappointed at the silence of the American church on this topic. The American church has been so cowardly. There's some churches, this one and many others, but this is the easiest win for the church to engage in. Unfortunately, we have people like Andy Stanley, who calls himself a pastor, who's a charlatan from Georgia, who has trans witch doctors come to his church and trans people on the podium of his church. So it's a deciding and defining moment for the church.
It is. And
that's who John Money is.
Yeah, and let's jump into the comment is demonic. Demonic sometimes becomes that umbrella phrase of everything that's bad. But let's drill into that a little bit because I'm going to go back to New Zealand. Sorry, Simon. But I'm going to go back to New Zealand for a moment because we just had a pastor here from New Zealand who said it's now illegal to read the first chapter of Romans inside the church. Now think about this, right?
And Australia, too.
Now, a lot of you say, what's Romans 1? Okay, so
reprobate mind.
It starts out by saying that evil men suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Okay? First step. You suppress the truth in unrighteousness, okay? And then you approve of those who do evil. Okay? And as you see this digression that happens in the book of Romans, it comes to a place to where they exchange the glory of God for the glory of man. So now it becomes a humanistic kind of centered world. And so they begin to worship the creature rather than the creator. So what's at stake here, you see, is the image of God. If you're creating the image of God, anything that destroys the image of God is demonic. Period. Okay? So then it finally comes to place, and then it says this. It says that women lusted in their heart for women and men for men, and God gave them over to a base mind. Now, this is really important because have you ever noticed how you can't usually logically dialogue with someone who's already gone down this philosophical path that's so contrary to even right and wrong? It is because their mind stops working the way God created it to work. So with that, I'm going to throw something else at you here, since you brought it up. Would you send your son or daughter to a university?
No, I would not. And I don't plan to. I mean, we have a little girl, and I mean, maybe if she wants to play competitive college sports, maybe. Look, I run a college organization for a living, and I visited more college, I think, than anybody in the last decade in the country, so I speak about this from authority. I wrote a best-selling book called The College Scam, and I encourage you guys to check it out, read it. All proceeds go to Turning Point USA of the book, and I lay out a 10-count indictment of how college is a racketeering operation. Outside of going to Hillsdale College or Liberty University, I don't see a reason to send your precious loved one to college. And again, we can have disagreement on that. I can go through every single one of the, let's say, talking points that parents have. So I'll just start with this one. Would you be okay if your son or daughter was a manager of a Walmart? Most parents would say no. And that's the whole ballgame. A manager of a supercenter Walmart makes between $350,000 to $400,000 a year. But hey, I don't want my kid working for Walmart. I'd rather have them, studying North African lesbian poetry at UCLA, and at least they went to college, right? Because they need to go to football games, and they need to be around friends. All the talking points are so silly. Parents, well, where are they going to meet people? Yeah, right. People only meet each other at college. They nowhere else. There's never any meeting anywhere else. The only place, I want them to have the college experience. Oh, to have like unlimited free sex and to do like substances that might kill them and like marijuana-laced fentanyl. Like that's...
Well, Charlie, it's just a paid vacation.
Well, but I want someone to tell me what world they think that college is virtuous and show me the evidence. I mean, again, there are some colleges that are good. I'm willing to, and it's not an exhaustive list, okay? There's probably 20 or 30 that are really doing a great job. And they say, well, okay, but, I want them to go work for a major corporation. All right, fine, great. Go look at the data. You know that half of kids that graduate from college end up getting a job that doesn't require a college degree 10 years after they graduate? Doesn't even require a college degree. You know that 41% of kids that enter college do not graduate? They don't even graduate. They shouldn't have gone in the first place. And by the way, I asked the kids at Fullerton today, I said, how many of you guys feel as if you're having to take classes that you didn't learn anything, you didn't find any value? Every hand goes up. So it's a racketeering operation, and it's about credentialing, not education. And here's this other mythology that you have to go tens of thousands of dollars into debt to learn. We have these incredible things now where you can basically be as smart as you want to be. I read 100 books a year. If you don't, that's your fault. I'm sorry. And so I'm not saying that like condescendingly. It's like, I'm pretty busy, right? Do 3 hours a radio day, 450 employees. I still am fitting in reading and learning because I love it. So it's what you decide to attach yourself to. So look, college is a scam. And if you send your kid to college, as Dennis Prager would say, you're playing Russian roulette with their values.
Well, my experience, I went to university, State University, and I was in a poli-sci class with about 600 students. The professor said, if you're a Christian, stand up. And I was naive enough to think this was going to be a good moment. And I stood up, and then he said, all the other students, look at the 3 biggest fools you're ever going to experience in your life.
But can I interject? This is what's called a show trial. Mm-hmm. And it's a humiliation tactic that is done by the left. Mao did it and Stalin did it, which is the signaling, the isolating, and the humiliating of the other. They do it to Christians. They do it to conservatives on campus. I didn't mean to
No,
apologize
that's
for
true.
interrupting, but
No,
that is
it's true.
communists love humiliation show trials.
Well, it's classic Marxism. I mean, that's what happened during the lockdown. If you're not aware of it, we're going to pit one group against another group, and we're going to therefore make the group we don't like the bad people. It's the same thing that's happened. CIA has done color revolutions, done it the same way. We just had it happen to us. And we were so naive, especially the church, that we couldn't see it and didn't even know what to do about it.
Yeah, that's so smart. I discovered something today, so you guys are going to hear some new content, even if you listen to everything like Teresa. She listens to all 3 podcasts a day. She's a superstar. But this is something I've never said publicly, which is, so they used Western Christian values against us and triggered an autoimmune response of our values against Western culture. If any of you know how autoimmune works, it's your own immune system that attacks your body. It's exactly what they've done to the West. So they've used our generosity, they've used our compassion, they've used our niceties as a way to advance the transgender agenda, as a way to advance medical totalitarianism. And the church is largely to blame for this because we believe that, Jesus was only love and not truth, and that's it. And so, for example, a lot of churches are saying, I don't want to touch the trans thing. If an 8-year-old wants to take Lupron, or if an 11-year-old wants to get a hysterectomy, which is, if you don't know what a hysterectomy is, that is a very serious surgery, okay? Like that is a very, it takes weeks to recover, and that is not a joke, right? You're having 11 and 12-year-olds go under general anesthesia for a hysterectomy and have all their parts just removed because they think that there's something that they're not. But we don't do anything because they've used our values against us, triggering this cultural autoimmune response where we are attacking ourselves. And it's brilliant when you think about it.
It really is.
So if you wanted to take over America, what do? You find what we consider to be virtues and push those virtues to the extent where they then become liabilities. So we brag that we're the most charitable and generous country. We brag that we are the most welcoming country. We brag that we are the most kind country. And so then the bad guys say, oh, really? You're welcoming? Well, then let's just keep your borders open. Let's see how welcoming you actually are. Oh, you're kind and compassionate? Well, you're not going to do anything if we start chopping your kids' parts off. And we don't know how to reconcile with it because we consider these to be virtues without any sort of restraint of what they actually mean or what they are, or with the inverse of truth, standards, distinction, or order. And so, we're living through kind of our own immune system attacking ourselves. And it's about time that we start to activate people to realize what's happening.
Here's a question I want all of you to kind of to ponder for a moment. Is it ever right to lie? How many of you say sometimes it's right to lie? Raise your hand. And how many of you would say the opposite? How many would not raise your hand if Jesus came back and asked you personally? Oh my gosh. How many of you feel like you're being tricked here? Okay, so let's put you in Holland in 1944, and you're hiding Jews, and the German soldier comes in and says, are you hiding Jews? Is it right to lie? Yes, it is. But why? Because there's a principle of life that supersedes what you're doing, and you're protecting the image of God. So if you're silent in the midst of what's happening today, are you protecting the image of God, or are you just trying to avoid conflict? It hurts when we get confronted with truth. And, you've got to get out of your little, us four no more circles long enough to see what's really happening and try to make a difference. You may not win. Doesn't matter if you win. It matters that you try. Amen? What do you think, Charlie? Truth must be relative, though, isn't it?
Well, no, truth is not relative. What you said, a lot of pastors that I know are going to email me very angry about what you just said, Phil, because that would be considered heresy with some of the pastors we work with. So I will remain neutral on that. I would lie, but I'm not saying that necessarily I could defend that theologically. I'm not willing to say that. But no, truth is not relative. Truth is absolute and objective. And this is what makes the Christian worldview and value system so different than anything else, is that we believe that truth was flesh. And that is John 1, is that the Logos became flesh and the Word became to dwell among us. And The idea that we see all throughout the scriptures is this tension between truth and lies and truth and deception. And understand that the devil, he does not use complete opposite lies. He'll use like half-truths, and he'll get close to it. And he's very crafty in what he does. I was asked recently to kind of summarize, the battle around us, and I think it's John 10:10, which is the enemy has come to lie, cheat, steal, and destroy, and Christ has come to give life and life more abundantly. And so we are on the side of life. We are on the side of trying to give people a new birth, as it says we must have in John 3. But if you go to these campuses, and one of these young ladies I dialogued with today, and the video you guys will see, she doesn't even believe what she says she believes, right? But she says that, truth is nothing but it's relative. And, there's no such thing as absolute truth, which then, of course, you say, is that absolutely true? And they can't quite process that, right? Because they just made a truth claim. And then, of course, then the social justice warrior activist will say that there's no such thing as good or evil. There's no spectrum of which. And then you ask, were concentration camps good or evil? And of course, they say evil. So of course, they develop the same spectrum, right? And this is what's very important. There's a great book if you're super nerdy and you want to read it. It's incredible. It's written by a non-Christian author, so I actually think it's even more credible, by Tom Holland, called Dominion. Awful title, great book. But it's all about how he argues that what we consider to be normative morality in the West is an inheritance of Christianity. So for example, the defending of the little, or that regardless of your size, regardless of who you are, you should be stood up for against a bully, right? Charity for somebody who has something less than you. Idea of individual rights. These are all Christian ideas. And if you don't believe me, go do mission work in Central Africa. Go to Uganda, go to places, they will routinely on a daily basis just leave unwanted babies by the fire and nobody thinks anything of it. And people are shocked when America, what do you mean? Like, I'm shocked that Americans don't know this, right? Talk to any pastor that has gone into the deep, I'm talking about the deep uncivilized parts of Africa. On a daily basis, they'll just abandon kids and just leave them because it's not a value. And it's just, we'll just have more, whatever. That kid has a deformity, or that kid is crying too much, or I don't have the food for it. And all the time in a lot of these undeveloped villages, you'll just have little babies cry themselves to death in the center of the village. Now, the reason you find that to be ghastly is because you were taught to find that ghastly. It's not normal. I'll prove it to you even further. Yeonmi Park grew up in the world's largest concentration camp, North Korea. She is a North Korean dissident, which I find to be fascinating. And when I had her on our podcast, on our show, I didn't grill her on the typical stuff. I was more interested in, did you know human suffering was inherently wrong from a young age? And she'd say, what are you talking about? We would walk over people begging for food and starving to death all the time. She's like, we thought nothing of it. That's just what happens, just the natural order of things. The same way that you would swat a mosquito, she would say, is the same way we'd just cast aside somebody who had a birth defect. What you think is normal is taught thanks to your Christian ancestors who embedded it into Western morality. And you walk around and people say, oh, it's common sense. It's Christian sense, not common sense. The Christian ethic built the entire Western code. Travel the world. You realize that any place that is civilized, they have some attachment to colonialism. What do you think colonialism did? It brought in English common law. It brought in due process. It brought in hey, don't keep on having Aztec ceremonies when you bring babies up to the top of altars. Now again, we're kind of hypocrites of our own values because we have our own Aztec ceremonies called Planned Parenthood, where we kill 1 million babies every single year. But I digress to this, which is to say, very often we fall into the trap that we as human beings have this natural common sense yearning of we know what is right or wrong. And anybody who has visited the third world, any evidence that we have is completely the exact opposite, which is in the state of nature, absent revelation and left with reason alone, There is no way you can come to the conclusion that murder is wrong, that rape is wrong, that stealing is wrong. And that is why my current theory, and I'm sure a theologian has made this before, is that Jesus Christ says, of course, all the laws of the prophets lie on two things. Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself, and Deuteronomy 6:3-5, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And I believe the way you do that is the 10 Commandments, which, again, is not a novel theory in some sense, but how do you accomplish those two things? The only two things it cares about is relations with God, no graven images, you shall not bow down, right? You shall honor the Sabbath and keep it holy, and then relations between the neighbor. You go around the planet, and if you, just those 10 commandments, you can even take the Sabbath out, but I'm a big Sabbath fan, and you say, is a society adhering to this more than not? And if they're not, they're probably in some sort of, very dark, third world existence. Don't take for granted the Christian inheritance we all have. We must recommit ourselves to it every single day.
I like to pose a question that I read in Francis Schaeffer. If you've not read Schaeffer, he's been gone a long time, but a Swiss theologian. He said, if we pass a law that third graders are bad for society, and everybody votes and agrees that we should eliminate third graders as a law, would it be okay? How many of you would think that would be okay? No, raise your hand this time. Make a commitment. That'd be okay? No. How many think that'd be wrong? Raise your hand. But what makes it wrong? And then the response is always, kind of to your point, well, everybody knows that. Well, that one's so obvious, but they did the same thing with Jews in Germany. They said they're not human beings, and who did they have behind them pushing it? Was the Lutheran Church. And the pastors who were there going, yeah, I think you're right. And whenever religion gets merged with despotism, with evil, you have a problem. That's why it's so critical that the church remains the church that God called it to be.
Amen. And can I make a different point on there? This is why I'm a stickler for words. It drives me nuts when people who are conservatives call our country a democracy. We are not a democracy. We are a republic, and I will explain to you the difference super quickly. But with that being said, even when the people on TV say our democracy, they really mean our oligarchy, not our democracy. So every time you hear democracy, just replace it with the word oligarchy, and it makes perfect sense. So what is the difference? A republic has eternal truths that do not change just because a majority wants it to change. A republic is built on eternal wisdom, and then the outgrowth of a republic is representative government and elections, but republics are intentionally slow in how you make massive structural change. Now, you can make massive structural change. At times you need it. We needed to abolish slavery, and I'm glad we did. But massive structural change requires years, consensus, debate, dialogue. Whereas a democracy, I want you to think, if we were a democracy, what our country would look like. If we were a democracy, during BLM, we would have had reparations. During all the race riots, we would have CRT. It would have become national curriculum. What a republic does, it's like, oh, you want this like crazy, weird idea? Wait 6 months, see if you still believe it. And all of a sudden we debate it, and we go on our talk shows, and next thing you know, public opinion changes, and maybe it's not that good of an idea anymore. We are not a democracy, we are a republic. That distinction and difference is incredibly important.
It's so true. And think about, let's think about, since we're talking about the rule of law, that's kind of been implied here, the rule of law, let's talk about immigration. It's a pretty hot topic, and kind of there's a part of you that says, well, gosh, people need to be safe, and people need to be free, people need opportunity, but if you stop and think about it, everything that's happened in the last 3 years at the border is illegal. Or do you disagree, Charlie?
No, I totally agree. Let me read you a verse. So this is, again, one of the major moral failings of the American church is on immigration. Even some churches are good on pro-life stuff. And I hear some of these pastors, and they're like, well, we should let them in with open arms. I said, what Bible are you reading? Now, it is true, you can misappropriate certain verses about loving the foreigner and loving the stranger. Nobody's talking about not loving. deportation can be a very loving thing. Go back to your country of origin. If you're such a great dreamer, go back to Mexico and make Mexico great again. You're a criminal. You broke into our country. You weren't invited. You're squatting in America. Go on back to Mexico City. Your presence is a violation of our law. So the people who want amnesty, which is a lot of Christians and a lot of people in DC, they have to answer the question, should we get rid of the law that says that breaking into our country is illegal? And they'll never say yes, right? Because they're all cowards. Like, oh no, we should have amnesty and grant them, status. Why? Exactly. What other crime should we just get rid of? For example, if you just rob a bank, should we be like, well, I bet you really want it. You were a dreamer. Like you had dreams about building a business. Or how about looting? Oh, they're blowing off steam, They want the TV because they want a better life for themselves. But you're laughing, but that's actually the argument they make. Mm-hmm. And so if you're weak on immigration, you're probably weak on all the other rule of law stuff. And remember, God is the giver of the law. Leviticus 19. A lot of people can, quote, you love your neighbor as yourself. They cannot quote, in an administration of justice, do not favor the poor or the rich. Ever. That is in the same chapter that Christ our Lord cites that all the laws of the prophet hang upon. No one ever talks about when you administer justice, you do not favor the poor person. It must be blind. The idea of blind justice is strictly biblical. Okay, but I want to read this verse, which is one of the last things that Moses has said in his farewell address to the people of Israel before they entered the land of Canaan, which of course is Israel, which is almost never talked about. Deuteronomy 28:43. Foreigners who live in your land will gain more and more power. While you gradually lose yours, they will have money to lend you, but you'll have none to lend them. And in the end, the foreigners will be your rulers. How often have you ever heard a pastor quote that verse? That is in the Torah. That is in the most holy section, according to, adherent Jews. And pastors only talking about, we must open the borders. And first of all, borders are not just biblical. You don't have borders without the Bible. It is a strictly biblical idea. The idea of a one world government is what Genesis 11 was all about, creating a oneness of the world. Nimrod tried to create a one world government for himself, for his own name. Borders are an idea of, no, you actually don't get to control the whole world. Sovereignty was given by God. Second thing, an entire book is built up building a wall. It's the book of Nehemiah. You should check it out. It's great. Literally, the whole, it's like, Donald Trump should just read from the book of Nehemiah and say, this is my plan for the entire country. Build the wall, Nehemiah 4:10, build the wall. I'm not kidding. And finally, just if I could say this, which is that if you want to just say we don't have the stomach to deport lawbreakers or criminals, that's fine. But then deep down, you're not serious about the law and you're allowing your feelings and your emotion to guide you. You're not allowing scripture or the Bible to guide you. And what you're doing is you might as well just walk around with two middle fingers to every legal immigrant and say, oh, I'm glad you filled out the form and waited 20 years to come to Vietnam. But I think that just because you can border jump and border cross the southern border, you give them priority. It's repulsive, it's anti-American, and every foreigner who broke the law should go back to their country of origin, period.
So important are nations, and by the way, they're trying to destroy nation. West Point just took their motto out of their whole doctrine of the university there. But if nations are so important, if we think about it, there's multiple judgments in the Word of God. For example, the cross was the judgment of sin. There's also what's called the judgment seat of Christ, where every believer, only believers, will appear and give an account for the deeds done in the body. That's accountability. But a lot of people don't know that Matthew talks about a judgment of nations, and that some nations will enter into the millennial reign and some will not. Some will be gone and some will not. And the real question is, as he separates them like sheep from goats, he does that with nations just as well as he does it with individuals. So if nations are not important, then why would he mention it? If you go to the book of Revelation, it talks about this restored garden, okay? And it talks about there the river of God flows from the throne of God, and on the leaves were the trees that were the healing of the, say it with me, nations. Nations will exist in eternity. We don't know what it's going to look like, how it's going to manifest, and who's going to run it, but it's clearly there. What do you think about that?
I agree completely, and I want you to keep going. I think it's this idea. So there's a big attack against an attack against the nation. And understand, World Economic Forum, George Soros, what they want is a forced assimilation of all the countries of the world to come together for oneness. And they're trying to recreate Genesis 11. Is that they want to conquer and imperialize the entire planet for their value system. They want to be kings of the world, and God distinctly scattered the people to prevent against that. And nationalism is biblical. Nationalism prevents wars. Loving your country is inherent in the human spirit. Jeremiah 29:7, demand the welfare of the nation that you are in, because your welfare is tied to your nation's welfare. Daniel cared about his nation. Elijah cared so much about his nation that he went and threw down with King Ahab and was like, hey, like you're worshiping these awful people. Let's go up to Carmel and see who the true God is. And by the way, people would call Elijah too political today. You know, these woke skinny jean pastors, don't worry, you passed the test.
I just gained weight, that's all.
That's right. These woke skinny jean pastors be like, I just like to preach the gospel, and I don't like to be political. And what you're saying is that you're too weak, cowardly to ever say anything that's true. Like, how about you open a Bible? Like Elijah, let's just say what happened after God acted from the heavens. He acted with quick and decisive judgment against the pagans of the day. And I'll just leave it at that. But we look at these figures out of the Bible: Esther, Mordecai, Nehemiah, Jeremiah. They were all political. They all cared about the nation. They were counselors to the king. And we're supposed to just kind of, this is this weird, and I will use the word demonic, it's an unclean spirit, because I love the word, you love the word, study it, pray over it, meditate it, fast over it. If you find like explicit teaching throughout the entire body that commands you to never care about your nation, that commands you to never, and there are questions you can have about render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, that's fine, those are legitimate questions, but then to turn it into like normative theology, that's never been the case of the church, ever. And in fact, I will just, one final thing, which is that caring about what happens around you is not just like convenient. There will not be a church if we don't do this. The most important thing is to share Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. The second most important thing is to make sure you can do the first thing.
That's good. I make this statement all the time, and people look at me like I'm crazy. The Bible is the most political book on the planet, because there's not a chapter, there's not a book that doesn't deal with our contending with a nation, trying to reform a nation, bring revival to a nation, protect the people within the nation. And I want to just pick up on Nimrod. You're talking about Nimrod back in Genesis in the beginning of a one world government. So there is the first human kingdom is Babylon. Babylon does not end as a geographical dimension. It actually is a spirit. And it's judged finally in Revelation 17 and 18, where it's called Babylon the Great Whore. And the Great Whore is a mindset. And so this one world order that began through Nimrod and the founding of Babylon continues all the way through. So I get asked all the time, where's America in biblical in biblical narrative? And I've read some of the weakest comments on that. But in my book, I want you to know that I have a definitive answer where America is in biblical prophecy. Just another shameless plug. But a mindset, a philosophical, demonic mindset of Babylonian is a religion. And it's exemplified in 3 city-states in the world: Washington, D.C., Vatican, and London Incorporated. And all 3 of those have an Egyptian obelisk designed to the sun god. The one in D.C. we call the Washington Monument. Interesting, isn't it? Maybe we need to look deeper into our world and into our Bible.